Now my colleague Hannah Ju and I are going to present some findings from the State of NYC Dance Force and Workforce Demographics. And we'd like to thank the support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. With this study, Dance NYC continues to reveal the activity and economics of nonprofit dance and dives more deeply into demographics, race, disability, age, gender, and LGBT identity of the workforce than ever before. Our goal for this session is to build on learning with all of you and to generate recommendations for policy and programs to foster diversity, equity, and inclusion in the dance workforce and hopefully the field nationally. Following our brief presentation of demographic highlights, we're going to turn it over to Ann Coates, who will be moderating today's panel. Welcome, everyone. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hannah.
Thank you so much, Jay, and thank you again, everyone, for being here for our session today as we dive into our report, State of NYC Dance and Workforce Demographics. So this report is grounded in research from DataArt's 2016 Cultural Data Profile, as well as a workforce demographics survey where individuals were asked to share some information regarding their information about their identity-related categories. The State of NYC Dance and Workforce Demographics is far more than a report just on the status quo. It's really a study and a call to join a growing movement to address inequity in dance and culture.
And what I'd like to do is actually encourage you to follow along. You all have a printed copy of the studies. Go ahead and follow along. You can also find this research on our website at dance.nyc under the research tab. Download it. And I'd also recommend downloading the appendices, which are very helpful.
Great, so we're going to start and go through some of the highlights of the demographic findings of the research. So first, on gender and LGBT. Findings show that 65% of women in the workforce and dance field identify as female. However, even though women hold the majority of staff positions in the field, the higher you go up in terms of seniority, the less female representation you will actually find. So senior staff, board and trustee positions, and other higher level positions actually see less women and less female representation, despite the fact that they hold the majority of positions in the work field. Additionally, the portion of respondents who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender is substantial at 21%.
And now moving on to age. In terms of age, 2/3 of survey respondents are 51 or younger, and only 5% identify as being 70 years of age or older. Age tends to be a significant indicator of organizational role and encourages thinking about how to accelerate the pipelines and bring intergenerational perspectives into organizational decision-making. People ages 52 to 70 comprise the highest percentage of senior staff and boards, while those that are 34 years of age or younger tend to be general staff. Something to think about, and I think to continue to ruminate on throughout today, is that younger generations also tend to be, according to the findings, more racially and ethnically diverse than the older generations here in New York City.
So when we look at African, Latina, OX, Asian, Arab, and Native American populations, also known as ALANA, we continue to see these patterns of exclusion. The city's population as a whole currently is 44% white, non-Hispanic, but in the dance workforce, 68% identified as white, non-Hispanic, which is out of step with the racial and ethnic makeup of the city itself. These responses also include the 0.7% that identifies as Middle Eastern or North African, also known as MENA. So the intersection between age and ethnicity show that younger generations among the respondents were actually more racially and ethnically diverse. So if you take a look at the breakdown between age range, 79% of people ages 52 and older identified as white non-Hispanic, and that percentage goes down to 65% for people under the age of 52. And similarly with what happens to gender, racial diversity decreases the farther one looks up the ladder of seniority, from general staff to senior staff positions and boards as well.
I'll give you a moment to look at that slide. Moving on to disability, findings show that 5% of respondents in this study identified as disabled, which is markedly below the 10% of New York City's population. That's something to really consider. Thinking about how that this gap identifies a powerful opportunity to engage more disabled New Yorkers, both in the dance workforce, but also the creative sector-wide. Another important thing to note is that organizations with the smallest budgets in the study, so $100,000 or less, were the most likely to employ disabled New Yorkers, as well as have a staff that's more racially and ethnically diverse.
So the report also offers recommendations and strategies around these issues and findings. And we also invite all of you to weigh in as well, especially with the Department of Cultural Affairs continuing the comprehensive cultural planning process. The call to address these inequities, some of which we briefly outlined today, will be very important in shaping local and national agendas. So we are convening our own constituents to broker solutions and pursuing additional data sources, especially on fiscally sponsored artists, to ensure that we are as expansive as possible in our own approach.
And then finally, considering the focus of the State of NYC Dance and Workforce Demographic Study on organizations across budget sectors and the dance workers within them, it felt important at this time of cultural planning to expand this research and to really begin to look at the demographics arts-wide here in New York City, specifically looking at fiscally sponsored artist projects and fiscally sponsored artists. Following a 6-week survey period to nearly 3,000 artists here in New York City, arts-wide, the data is now being analyzed by Web Management Services Incorporated, with thanks to 9 research partners who are also fiscal sponsors, and our lead research partner, Fractured Atlas. We hope that you will join us in 2 weeks at New York Live Arts, March 26th, for the first public presentation of that research, along with a series of recommendations that were based on cultural planning questions that were in the survey that asked artists about access to resources, so things like affordable health care and rehearsal space. So this is going to be a really important conversation, March 26th. Please join us. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ann Coates, who will be moderating today's panel. Ann, she'll also be introducing our speakers.
Thank you, Jay. Can you all hear me? I'm Ann Coates, consultant, sometimes researcher for Dance NYC, but not on this study, and I'm happy to be here. And I'm happy to be joined by a really great panel with some unique perspectives. We have Simi Linton, disability arts advocate, and also Dance NYC Disability Task Force member, Andrea Louie, executive director of the Asian American Arts Alliance, Kaisha Johnson, founding director of Women of Color in the Arts, and Joan Jeffrey, director of the Research Center for Arts and Culture at the Actors Fund. What we hope to come out of this discussion is recommendations. Actually, I hope we come up with a baker's dozen, you all, to give to Dance NYC. Research is a cornerstone of Dance NYC's work, and it uses that research to forward its advocacy. So with this panel and with your questions, I hope that we get there. In terms of questions and answers, we'll take questions submitted via the app, and I hope you all have downloaded it, and then increase the font size because I had to on my devices, I couldn't read it. I think we also, correct me if I'm wrong, we have index cards, Dance NYC, is that correct? For those of you who don't want to use the app, you can use an index card and raise your hand and they'll pass them out and then they'll collect them and get them up to me. Rules of the road, folks, we hope that you'll identify them yourselves before you speak. And for those presenting, and I think that's just you, Joan, if you could just say next when you have a slide, or indicate that you've gone to the next slide. Okay. And if you have any charts, say that there's a chart or graph there. Before we get started, I'd like to do a quick poll of the room. So by show of hands, who here is a dance maker? Defined however you'd like. Non-dance artist? Who here is a policymaker or a government representative? Welcome. Anyone here from the cultural planning team? Darn it. Who here is an educator? Do we have any service organizations in the house? Thank you. What about other researchers? Welcome. Do we have any dance presenters? Who here is a funder of dance? Welcome. Any funders of the arts in general but not dance? Welcome. Who works with any of the above in a consulting capacity? And who doesn't identify with any of these categories? Shout out.
Just a general arts worker, administrator, manager.
Anybody else?
I would say the same.
Okay.
Administration.
Welcome. That really helps us up here on the panel to know who's in the room, but also for you to get to know one another. Okay, so we've heard the research. Now our panelists are going to respond, and they have around 5 minutes to respond to the research, not only what we heard, but also the report, and then we'll have a Q&A. So I think we're going to go in alphabetical order, leading off with Joan Jeffrey.
Thank you, Anne. So let me give you a little context before I start with the slides. I'm the founder and director of the Research Center for Arts and Culture, which started in 1980 at Columbia University School of the Arts, then moved to Teachers College, where I also directed the graduate program in arts administration. I've spent 30 years doing research on living professional artists, and today's presentation is focused on the age cohort of this research. It was in about 2000 that I started looking at older professional artists with a commission from the NEA to study jazz musicians. That was followed by a study of career transition for dancers, and a study of older visual artists called Above Ground, and older performing artists in New York and LA called Still Kicking. You can find all that at artsandcultureresearch.org online, or I'm happy to give you my card. I'm now working on 2 legacy projects. One for older visual artists called Art Cart Saving the Legacy. The second for older performing artists called the Performing Arts Legacy Project, which I'm developing for the Actors Fund, and we hope to launch online in a couple of years. So that's just the context of where I come from. Let's see if this clicker works. It does. So my presentation is about the age cohort, research on older dancers and choreographers. There's a silhouette of a dancer, and the first thing I have to tell you as a researcher is no one study answers everything. So keep that in mind as we look at all these good data and make comments. This is a great basis to start with. There's always room to grow. Again, the context, another silhouette of a leaping dancer. There is, and I'm sure you'll agree, increased interest in aging in dance vis-a-vis creative aging and this whole movement that's grown up with some interesting research being done. The health benefits of fitness and dance, which I'm sure you're all aware of. But this puts dance, I think, on the map in a new way. There are certainly more articles about older dancers, about the tenacity of being an artist, putting that into your life's work, engaging with something, which is what all the baby boomers say they want, engagement, and demographic findings in recent studies that have been done. So this slide has a Degas dancer. The recent findings that you know already are that 5% of the workforce in the Dance NYC study are over 70 versus 9 or 10% of the general population. The Ithaca study, which many of you know, that was done for DCLA, which looks like there's no separate analysis by age, unless I don't see all the data, but except when combined with race. But one of the things in the report that jumped out at me was that the types of diversity important to people in their organization, as you can see, ethnicity 90%, race 88%, but also age 86%. So this is on somebody's radar. on a lot of people's radar. So I'm going to share with you a few findings from some of the studies we've done, which might relate to some of the things we're thinking about today. So we did a study that was published in 2004 called Making Changes, Facilitating the Transition of Dancers to Post-Performance Careers. The authors were William Baumol, a very well-known, important economist, all the way back to the 60s. David Throsby, who's a cultural economist in Australia, and myself. And the question I wanted to answer here for you is, when are dancers considered old by themselves? So current dancers, you can see, say they expected to stop dancing in Australia at age 40, in Switzerland at 38, and the USA at age 40. And former dancers did stop dancing at age 30 in Australia, a decade below what people expected of current dancers, 35 in Switzerland, and 33 in the US. If you wonder what stopped most of them, a third of them stopped because of injury. In a later study that we did, Still Kicking, Aging Performing Artists in New York and LA metro areas, that came out in 2011, we looked at dancers and choreographers age 62 and over in LA and New York City. And I just present a few findings because I think they're pretty interesting. One is the fact that 57% of the New York artists and 100% of the LA artists thought they were discriminated against due to age. And one of the things when we start talking about disability that's very important to remember is the rampant ageism in America. So that very often I think people do not want to say they have a disability because of the ageism against them for having done so. We also found that 34% in New York, 67% in LA are still training in their primary discipline. This is 62 and over, remember. That 34% in New York and 20% in LA have a deeper creative experience than when they were younger. And that 61% in New York and 100% in LA earn money through their art. So these are kind of important background things to keep in mind. So what are some of the challenges? And you can see the challenges also in my own research. So the small sample sizes, it's true of what you just saw. So it's not great to say you have 3 people and that's 100%, which I just said. Separation of functions, you know, what applies to dancers, what to choreographers, what to teachers, what to costumers, in terms of age, which is what I'm looking at right now. And as with all research, why do we want this information? What are we going to do with it? It's all very nice to have research. I'm a big applied researcher. I like to see change. So I hope that some of these findings from the Dance NYC study can end up in policy, can end up in the cultural plan. So an example of what kind of change would be, can we use these data to eliminate discrimination for pension benefits, to raise salaries so people can obtain a decent pension? And can we apply it to our practice? So an example would be how to enrich our administrative workforce with intergenerational teams. You heard some of the figures just now of older people being on boards, younger people being on staff. How do we change that? And finally, and I'm probably jumping the gun here, but too bad, some suggestions. Obviously, more research to better understand aging in the dance professions, not just for dancers. There are critical issues for administrators, for staff. To create a policy across dance education and dance companies to include career transition as an integral part of training. When we did the career transition study, it was only the English National Ballet at that time that had a whole curriculum for their current dancers that included career transition as a part of their career, not as a cliff you fall off at the end. The use of data to raise salaries in dance is critical. I think I sent in a survey to the Department of Cultural Affairs online We said it's all very nice to say we need combined calendars with each other. That's an easy thing to do. How do we raise salaries in the dance field? How do we do that? Creating intergenerational administrative teams and valuing the legacy of older dance professionals by creating a program to capture experiences, many programs to capture experiences. Thank you.
Yeah, so Joan, you're putting me to shame right now.
Good.
Joan is the researcher. I consider myself a synthesizer of research. First, thanks so much to Dance NYC for this invitation to participate in this year's symposium. And thanks to them for undertaking this research. For those of you that don't know, Women of Color in the Arts is a membership-based organization, service organization that's working towards creating equity in the performing arts field by buttressing and advocating for administrators of color, so those women that are working behind the scenes, beyond the stage. We're specifically focused on raising the visibility of the talent that permeates our field and ensuring that those in leadership positions and those striving for leadership roles are supported in their professional endeavors. We're also working on creating a pipeline for new professionals entering their fields, and our values are strictly focused on the belief that leaders of color, specifically women, bring something very unique and extremely valuable to which is a stubbornly homogeneous field. And our values lie in encouraging critical dialogue about the challenges both people of color and women face, and the field faces in addressing these challenges. So we believe that the power of collective intention and action will shift the internal and external conversations being had about racial equity, inclusion, and diversity, which brings us to some very salient points of this study. So this study is of interest to me on a number of levels, as well as an organization. We've also begun undertaking a smaller sampling surveying the field, specifically through the lens of our members and affiliates. And I think that the findings that Dance NYC has revealed is, at this point, not shocking or even unusual, specifically in regards to the racial and ethnic makeups and inequities that exist. But the looming question here is, what are we as a field going to do with these findings? So the first major arc that we're seeing here is that women make up the majority of the dance workforce, but are in the minority when it comes to those that are serving in leadership positions. And by that, we're speaking of executive directors, artistic directors, presidents, and CEOs. And this data echoes pretty much through the entire performing arts field. This very critical piece of data is, in fact, one of the reasons that Women of Color in the Arts was founded, to help promote equitable opportunities for women leaders. And to be clear, our belief is that you lead from wherever you are, wherever you're stationed, the position that you occupy. But we're specifically talking about those that, leadership positions that also carry this very overused hierarchical titles that we see from the corporate world that we have mimicked in our sector. What I found most striking but not surprising is that, and they showed, they presented some of those findings, but I'd like to reiterate, is that of the survey respondents, 8% identified as Black, African American, 6% identified as Asian, 5% identified as Hispanic Latino, and 0.5% identified as Indigenous. So what's surprising is that the data showed that among the disciplines, what was surprising is that the data showed that among the disciplines of theater, music, and visual arts, dance led the pack in terms of female representation and racial diversity within the workforce. What I can say, just based on WOCA's membership, is that a large portion of the women of color leading dance organizations are founders, entrepreneurs, and perhaps those in leadership roles that have transitions from artistic roles to more administrative ones. What must be noted about this study is that the data was compiled from organizations funded by New York City's Department of Cultural Affairs. So that leaves out a fairly large population of smaller, perhaps more grassroots organizations that are doing tremendous work, serving diverse communities, and are independently funded and or supported. So we must consider this information when considering the data at large. While the numbers in WOCA's assessment rings fairly accurate, we must not discount the fact that many organizations, companies, and community groups were not represented here in this study. WOCA itself is embarking on a study of our membership in the field to obtain some critical data about the positions that we hold, where we reside, the types of organizations we work for. And while this is inclusive of the dance field, this will be a sampling across performing arts disciplines, giving us a wide and broader perspective of critical data that is needed to amplify the voices of our field. So the data that was collected in the Dance NYC study was collected from respondents broken down by organizational type, which included dance makers, educational organizations, presenting organizations, and service organizations. And that's right on par with the bulk of WOCA's membership. And clearly my primary focus when looking at this data was centered on race, ethnicity, and gender. But the age and disability inequities were also very telling and illuminating for me. Next steps. Where do we go from here? Because we can sit here and pontificate all day about this information. But I'll say, with all due respect to Dance NYC, organization, and members of this community who are doing some really important work, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the disparity between those organizations that are being funded large and inordinate amounts of money, and those that are not even at the discussion table with funders. And you can look to the data that speaks to this very thing. It brings us to the heart of the issues that we face as cultural communities of color and organizations that are led and comprised and serve a majority people of color. And this is not just an issue for us, this is an issue for the field at large. Coalition building is key, and not just partnership for partnership's sake and for the optics of partnership, but for really gathering together to move forward this internal and external shift that we're hoping for. That's all.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a treat to be on this panel and to hear both of the previous speakers discuss disability as an element of diversity and the ways that coalition building will be critical to our development. Too often, I think we feel that we're pitted against each other for scarce resources, and not only is that not productive, but it really ignores the ways that our groups meet at various nexuses of identity and experience and need. So it's a treat to be here. And it is a treat to be at a Dance NYC convening. Dance NYC, under Lane's leadership, is doing something enormous and thorough with respect to disability equity. And I will do pretty much anything they ask, even getting up at ungodly hours in the morning, because I am so moved and excited by their endeavors. So, as the DCLA moves forward toward a cultural plan and attempts to redress inequities in New York City arts, there are a number of things to keep in mind. And I've picked out just a few. I'm going to call them alerts, a few alerts vis-a-vis disability that I'd like to share with you. Number one, in terms of research. Studies such as that carried out by the Department of Cultural Affairs and by Dance NYC attempt to document the phenomenon, the inequities and disparities, in employment and resources. Disability was incorporated in both of these studies. The report, Diversity in the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, states, so this is the report issued by the DCLA, quote, "We were nonetheless surprised to receive nearly no records of anyone with a disability out of the 48,280 employees, volunteers, and board members who were recorded." Now, either that's because the data collection process itself was faulty, which some claim, or because that's the truth. And I think the real truth probably lies somewhere in between. It is complicated to assess disability, but with the engagement of researchers and legal experts who understand the domain, it is not impossible at all. And so it behooves those who are assessing the situation to engage with people with expertise in this arena, and then we won't have faulty problems. The Dance NYC data that Jay and Hannah reported, which does conspicuously and specifically address disability in an informed way, helps to fill the gaps in the DCLA study. Okay, so that was number one. Number two, redressing inequities. Research is needed across the arts to underscore the disparity in employment and employment opportunities for disabled and non-disabled workers. That is very true, of course, of the dance workforce. But we shouldn't wait on the research to craft new policy and practices that increases equity and inclusion. In part because so many of the studies that are out there are faulty or are missing data, but also because we've got to get moving on this and not make allocation of funds and resources contingent on the results of data alone. Anecdotally, data and informal observation really indicate a lot that we need to know. And I'd like to take a moment to address the conundrum of what are called diversity initiatives. Every one of the organizations that you have any contact with have come up with some kind of, quote, diversity initiative. I think the term is ill-defined, and the criteria for which groups are included and are not included are never made clear. We talk about race and gender, etc., as socially constructed categories, but rarely talk about diversity itself as a similarly manufactured term. Back in the 90s, when I had an academic career, the term multicultural was often used instead of diversity. And I have a quote for you from Henry Louis Gates from 1993, which I think underscores the dilemma. Gates notes, "The extended face-off with conservatism has had a deforming effect, encouraging multiculturalism to know what it is against and not what it is for." He went on to say, "What is this crazy thing called multiculturalism? Multiculturalism itself has some imperial tendencies. We are told that it has to do with representation of difference, but whose differences? What differences?" So I am urging those of us who would be in a position to do such a thing to have a day-long convening on the notion of diversity. What is a reasonable response to inequity, and how do we craft a diversity agenda that is really meaningful and is theoretically based and as well is documentable in reliable and valid ways. And if I had the opportunity to go one-on-one with Henry Louis Gates, and maybe I'd bring Alice along for support, that would be a dream. Anyway, so that was number two. Number three, vis-a-vis disability, I'd like to talk about access versus arts. The term access is thrown around a great deal with regard to economic access, geographic access, transportation access, cultural access, and so forth. Vis-a-vis disability, it has specific meaning and specific valence. We are in an environment right now which is very, 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 very accessible for many people with impairments, and I commend Dance NYC for their work in this domain. But too often, arts organizations conceptualize disability equity as an issue of access. But the disability arts community sees this as only one piece of the puzzle, and I think Tom Finkelpearl addressed this morning. While we support endeavors related to access to arts and culture, signed theater performances for deaf people, ramps, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that is only one piece of the puzzle. Because access gives us the chance for art to have an impact on us. But equally important is that we support artists and artistry so that we can have an impact on art. I'm going to repeat that again. Access gives us, meaning disabled people, disabled artists, the chance for art to have an impact on us. But if we don't pay attention to the cultivation, support of disabled artists and disabled artistry, we get no chance to have an impact on art and all that art does. Number 4, disability costs money. Disability rights strategists have often stated, that integration and inclusion of disabled people is something analogous to racial integration or gender equity. While I agree to an extent and certainly support the idea of disability as a civil rights and social justice issue, there is a piece that is missing in that discussion, and that is that disabled people are costly and disruptive in ways that other groups' integration is not. Every time I get on the bus, and the bus has to wait for me to get on, people to shift their position, for me to get in place, and for the driver to get back in his or her seat and proceed, I've disrupted the transportation system. I wouldn't have it any other way, but it is disruptive. And disability costs money. And I think that, I don't want to scare people off, but if we don't face that, we are not going to plan for it. And so as we face putting disability into the cultural plan, we need to honestly state that it may cost money to have us on board. And if we don't build that expense into the cultural plan, cultural organizations will be less willing to present disability arts, because then the expense of disability becomes a disincentive for them to engage with disabled artists. So I think that needs to be written into any plan in order to address those inequities. So that was number 4. Number 5, the time is right. Disability artistry is reaching new heights of creativity and exposure. How many were here last night for the performance? You missed, by my count, and I don't have my glasses on, 99% of you missed something extraordinary. Alice Shepard, who's here with us today, and Mark Brew, and 2 other physically integrated dance companies did amazing work. And I'm welling up because it was a moment in disability arts history that is unprecedented. It was exciting. We had a full house, and the energy, I can still feel it in the walls. So thank you, and thank Gibney for that work. And there is more of it. There's more out there. There are performance artists. There are dancers. There's an artist with a piece in the Whitney Biennial. whose work is extraordinary. We're out there, we're happening, and I'm going to tell you in a moment now how we can move that forward. So, number 6, last and most meaningful for me, a group of disabled artists and allies have formed an organization to put disability on the map. You heard about it this morning, both from Lane and from Tom Finkelpearl. Our group is called Disability Arts NYC, and our acronym is DANT, D-A-N-T. We formed when we recognized that without our group, an advocacy and watchdog group, disability would not be adequately addressed in the cultural plan. We are so new that we don't even have a website yet, so for those of you writing it down, I appreciate it, but we're not even out there in space yet, but I have cards and I'm glad to talk with you afterwards. The Department of Cultural Affairs has engaged with DANT on a number of occasions and will again this coming Friday at Commissioner Finkelpearl's office hours at the New York Historical Society. That's from 3 to 5 on Friday. I hope many of you will be there. How many are planning to be there? Okay. Please come and lend your voice to this issue. To the DCLA's credit, I think they have understood our need to be vigilant all along. They have engaged with us actively, but we are not letting the heat, what's the metaphor? Anyway, we're not letting off. We're keeping our finger on them to block those metaphors. We are remaining vigilant and tight. We need your support. We want to help your institution and organization to be as inclusive of disability arts and artistry as it can be, and we want the city and the cultural planning to be as equitable as possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I have the different mic. I like this. Thank you, everyone. I'm Andrea Louie. I'm the Executive Director of the Asian American Arts Alliance, which for 34 years here in New York has been supporting the artistic careers of individual artists and small groups in all disciplines. And just because of the current political climate, I really want to emphasize that we welcome folks who identify as having cultural roots from the Pacific Islands through the Middle East, including North Africa. And I think that's been really important to us, and we've been working very closely or keeping in close tabs with our APA colleagues in the social service sector, because as we all know, there's lots going on. So thank you all for being here, and thanks to Dance NYC for having us. And I'm really impressed that there's this many people this early on a Sunday in this particular room. Yeah, right? I'm like totally impressed. So I'm very happy to be here, but I also wanted to acknowledge out loud that we know we do not have gender diversity on this panel, so just wanted to say that. I mean, we rock, but you know, we just wanted to say that out loud. I think that I really wanted to applaud, like many of my fellow colleagues have here, to really applaud Dance NYC for doing this study. And I think we also want to acknowledge that it's a first step, right? Lots of, the arts field is super behind when it comes to counting things, counting ourselves, and finding meaning in that. So whenever you start doing something, it can be really messed up. I'm not implying that this particular study is messed up, but there are flaws and there are absences. But I think it's a great opportunity for us to begin this discussion. I know that when we all had this prep call, we were all like yapping on the phone. We're like, well, what about this? What about that number? You know, we were really challenging this data, I think, in a really robust and healthy way. We're all being super polite now, but we weren't so polite with Anne. But it was really a healthy inquiry, and I encourage us all to take that sort of energy and move it forward. So what I'd like to do with my time here is to help contextualize some of this work within the larger scope of state and national numbers, particularly around funding, and then I have my own list of recommendations as well. So first of all, I know that here in New York, it's really easy rather, for us to feel absence and lack. And there is absence and lack. But I think we also really need to acknowledge our own privilege. First of all, we're very privileged to be here together. I am deeply privileged to be on this panel with these incredibly smart, informed and educated women who are talking about this sort of topic. This is not the way it is everywhere. So, and you can also follow the funding for that, right? So here in New York State, the New York State Council for the Arts in fiscal year 17 had a budget, or has a budget, of $45.17 million, okay? NYSCA was the very first state arts council to be founded in this country. It was founded in 1960, and it was the model for the National Endowment for the Arts, right? And we're the biggest. If you look at that list of numbers for all the states for this year, New York State remains the largest state funder of the arts in this country. California also has a very robust arts and cultural landscape, but their budget is less than half at $17 million, right? Just think about it, less than half. And those folks in Kansas, I looked this up yesterday, those folks in Kansas, their state arts council has $188,000 to support the arts in their state, right? Dorothy, we hear you. Toto, we are pushing for you. So I wanted to acknowledge that, and then the other side that I wanted to acknowledge is that here in New York City, in spite of all the things we might have to say about this city that we live in and all the struggles that we have with it, we are also very, very robustly supported, right? Last year, or in this current fiscal year, we did fight for those of us who work in arts advocacy. We did help to fight for a $10 million increase, and this is actually the first year in a really, really long time that the New York City Cultural Affairs Department actually had a slightly lower budget than the entire National Endowment for the Arts, right? So we have a lot of support here. I just want to acknowledge that because it's not the same anywhere. Not that there aren't a lot of absences, not that there isn't inequity, not that there isn't sort of institutionalized racism or what have you. I just want to say that out loud, but we are also very well supported here. So this is also an opportunity for us to raise our voices, really use that as a place of moving forward. It seems to be cutting in and out. I'm going to switch. To old school. Is this one working? Okay. So let's see. Oh, and the other thing that I wanted to point out is that there were some numbers in the study which are very, very true and very revealing about how support from government and from corporations has fallen, particularly for dancers and dance organizations, because that was the focus of this study, but that's the case across the board. I also wanted to acknowledge that there's an incredible number of nonprofit organizations, right? In this nation, there are now 1.1 million nonprofit organizations, and that's a 25% increase since 2001. Just as an example, in the for-profit world, they've only had an increase in the number of businesses of like 0.5% in the same period. So we're part of a really robust sector that is growing and is competing for pools of money that are, for the most part, flat or shrinking. But I do want to acknowledge that there's a lot of us in many good ways because people want to do good work. So sort of holding that then, I want to move forward with a handful of recommendations that I have that are in no particular order. I think, like Aisha, I really want to give a shout out and really have an appeal for meaningful and genuine partnerships and collaborations, particularly between the big dogs and the not so big dogs. And I wanted that to be really meaningful, because for those of us who are smaller, there's always that chance that you're going to be co-opted, right? You're going to be swallowed up. Or, and this happened to us, and the institution will remain unnamed, but it's sort of like, yes, Asian American Arts Alliance, we want you to help program our festival for Asian American artists, and we're going to give you $165 to do that. We did it. We did it, but I think that that's part of a general trend, not just among major cultural institutions, but just in our climate in general, where all of us are being asked to do a lot for nothing or very little, and that needs to change, because if we want to collaborate, that takes time, right? I think, really pointing to what Simi's talking about, this work takes time and it takes money, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to invest in it in really meaningful ways. My second recommendation is that I would really encourage funders to look again at re-granting as a way of addressing inequalities. Re-granting used to be more popular than it is, but it kind of got not so sexy, particularly among corporate funders. But I think it's a really meaningful way for for service organizations, for borough arts councils and whatever, who really know and work on the ground with their communities, to be able to take a larger amount of money that is given from a funder and help run panel processes to give those funds out in smaller increments to help reduce those barriers of access. Right? So the Asian American Arts Alliance actually had a re-granting program for more than 15 years, and we gave away more than $800,000 during that time, which we were really proud of. But they were really small increments. It was like $500 to a dancer or dance company to put on a performance. So chances are, big foundation, New York City, they probably don't want to mess with that. It's just too much work, and then they always question what's the impact of that. But I think that potential funding is deeply important, and it's also really important in reducing the barriers of access to funding. So that would be my second point. The third one is actually a shout out to you guys, right? I mean, there were a lot of dancers in the room, a lot of arts administrators, funders yourselves. We all hate filling out these crazy surveys that are really long. For those of you who receive DCA funding, you have to fill out the Culture Data Project, Data Arts. Yeah, I'm on the board. You can talk to me later about how you hate it. But I mean, this study is an example of what that contributes to, right? When you fill out that survey, take that time and consider it an act of resistance, because we have not been counted, especially small organizations, community-based organizations, people in communities of color. We have not been at those tables, and we have not been counted, right? We are going to still be considered statistically irrelevant if we do not fill out those forms. So just a shout out, please do it. It's all good. It'll come back to us. It's coming back to us in this way. And then finally, the last recommendation I would have is also to us as individuals, and that is, in every instance where we find ourselves, just ask yourselves, who's not at this table? How can I be more inclusive? Who am I not thinking of? And if you're in a position of hiring, then ask yourself, what are different signifiers of success in leadership? Too often, leadership is really tied, especially in the nonprofit world, to how much money you have raised. And particularly, I think, when it comes to the issue of diversity, a lot of us who've been working in communities of color have not necessarily had access, to the Mrs. So-and-so's on Park Avenue. We haven't necessarily raked in those millions of dollars. So no, we haven't necessarily demonstrated that, but what's another thing that we can look for? I think we can look for, what is this person's propensity for bridge building or partnership building? Let's ask for that. And when we have those diverse folks as members of our team, how can we support them and acknowledge them? Because, let's be honest, that doesn't always happen on the receiving end. And then finally, if I can take just a second to say that the Asian American Arts Alliance is really proud to be administering for the 4th year in a row the Jaden Wong Award. This year it will be in choreography. The deadline is May 25th. And Ariel, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and stand up there. This is Ariel, our Interim Director of Public Programs. If you're interested in learning more about that award or nominating someone or nominating yourself, please see Ariel. Sorry, you have to be 30 or under to win. That wasn't our rule. It came from the funder. But please, please help us get the word out about that. So
and if you can't get here to me, it's aestrada@aaartsalliance.org.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. So I'm keeping my eye on the time, and there's actually a countdown clock that has got my attention. So I want to sort of zoom through the next part of the logistics. A reminder that if we have time, we're going to take some questions. Use the app. We have 1 or 2 questions on the app so far. And index cards. And I do want to thank our scribes, Jay and Hannah. You've been writing down the suggestions that we've heard. And I see that we have more than a baker's dozen, but I'm going to keep going if we can. The questions, in the interest of fostering diversity and inclusion here, are what can dance do? What is dance going to do? How can dance lead here in equity and inclusion? And I want to ask a couple of questions about the aha moment. So I'm going to think about this for a second, panelists, because I had a couple. I'm wondering if you did too. Did you hear things from your other panelists, your co-panelists, that surprised you that you're going to take back to your constituents, or that prompted a recommendation that you didn't come up with on your own, but now you want to add to that growing list? I have one that I'll offer, and it just builds off something that was said here, and that has to do with impact and measuring impact. Sometimes I know as a grantee, it's been hard to know what impact means to the funder. What are you looking for as a funder? How can we measure it? I also know there's been a resistance in the arts field to measuring impact. There are some I know that say, why should we have to? Well, we do, we need to play that game. But how can we work out meaningful measures of impact for research and for working with funders to foster this work? So that's one of my additions to the recommendations, and I hope our scribes got that. So aha moments or new recommendations, panelists? Joan, you're nodding.
Yeah, first of all, I've enjoyed being on this panel with all of you, and thank you very much. I have a question. I may be way behind in the research we've all done on this, but as I was listening to the presentations, I was thinking, why are we still calling it disability? Why are we not calling it different abilities?
Oh.
And it's not a anything. I mean, I remember about 100 years ago when I did a study and made the critical error, which was pointed out to me in a room full of funders, of presenting data as white and non-white. And somebody said to me, we're not non-anything. And I said, you're absolutely right. And so I have a particular sensitivity to the negative view of things, and I'm wondering if we're not doing ourselves a disservice.
Simi, I'm going to let you take that.
I have been a disabled woman for many years. I used to be handicapped, and then for a while I was handy-capable. And I've been so many things you have no idea in my time. The disability community struggles with language, and those of us who talk about the disability community struggle with language. Where I and a number of people nodding their head up and down in this room have landed is in what we call disability first language. You'll notice that I define myself as a disabled woman. I did have that phase where I was a person with a disability or a woman with a disability, putting disability secondarily. Yes, the term disability has various connotations, but we have reclaimed it, we've owned it, we put it first and foremost, and I urge you to do the same. It is the term of choice. And one of the things we do to deal with the issue of white, non-white vis-a-vis disability is that we center disability. So I call all of you walkies non-disabled and center disability, and that's the way that we handle it. And Alice is snapping her fingers, so I guess I got it right.
Any other ahas or new recommendations? One of the things that I heard, and I want to build upon, Andrea, was to stop undercapitalizing, or put more positively, adequately capitalizing efforts to address inequality. So our scribes, can you capture that? Adequately capitalizing efforts to address. I think it's not enough to say we need more funding, but we need to say what we need more funding for and what it's going to do. We all know we need more funding. For the funders in the room, you know that. And I also heard a decentralization regranting program to address inequality and inclusion. Do we have any index cards or questions from the floor? Is that it? Now, can I read this? What recommendations do you have, panelists, for creating diverse pipelines in our workforce?
Yeah, I'll take part of that. So, diverse pipelines. First of all, it begins with the education, letting people know that, listen, we as a field there's so many opportunities beyond the stage. The other thing is what I've been talking incessantly about over the past year is the hiring practices that exist in our field, which I have no idea why nonprofits create these enormous barriers with the criteria they ask applicants to meet. Having a PhD in Arts BS in order to have an entry-level position in this field it's really, really crazy. But think about all of the cultural workers that you know that are activating their communities, building bridges, engaging and creating diverse audiences and new audiences. Are they working at those large institutions? Just think about it for a moment. Because no barriers have been created for them. You know, we don't need, and I did a lot of schooling myself, but you know, we don't need PhDs to do this work. Most of us that are doing this work have been doing this work and are passionate about this work and are informed about this work and are intelligent in the practices about this work. So creating these, taking away all of these barriers, I really think is going to help fix this pipeline problem.
Andrea?
Yeah, and I also just want to say that whenever I hear this word about how there's no one in the pipeline, I get really angry because I work with tons, I have my colleagues right here in the front row, I work with tons of awesome, you know, arts folks of color all the time. We are already here. And I don't know why it is we seem to be so invisible, but apparently we are. So I'm just gonna go back to one of the recommendations that I made about recognizing different forms of leadership and skill by sharing an anecdote. Like, I'm not perfect at this, but at one point during my 6 years at the Arts Alliance, I needed to hire a development manager. So the person I ended up hiring was an actor who had never worked in development officially in his life. But he was working the third shift as a hotel concierge. And I'm like, you know what? You got it. He got the job, he did just fine. You know, I could teach him to write a grant, and he was good at that too. But.
Joe?
Yeah, let's talk about invisibility. How about age? So, I actually went to one of those focus groups a few days ago at the Department of Cultural Affairs on Aging. And one of the questions I asked, to which everyone blanched, was, why don't we create a Department of Health, Education, the Arts, and Aging? That, by the way, would encompass disability. It would encompass difficulties in education. It would encompass a lot of the research that is now emerging on the health benefits of being in the arts. And I think part of what I was saying was, we want a commitment from places like the Department of Cultural Affairs that this is an important issue. And I think it's not just money. Of course we need money. It's not just monikers, we need those too. But I think we're asking for a kind of a public umbrella and a commitment from our City Cultural Affairs Agency, which is the greatest in the country, to help us move forward. And quite frankly, there are enough creative aging programs in the city that all you'd have to do is create the umbrella and put them under it without spending a dime, and we'd have some resources that people would know about. So yes, we need resources, but it's also about how you package, how you market, and what kind of public commitment you make.
Simi, do you have anything to add to this?
It's sort of related, but going back maybe a beat or two, and that is that setting the criteria for particular jobs in ways that privilege one group over another is definitely problematic. The other is that in various organizations attempting to fulfill quote-unquote diversity mandates, or trying to have people on staff who address issues of diversity, they make those staff positions low level and don't get people who are at the central administrative, high-level administrative level. I haven't formulated this yet, but I think my point is clear, that it's a two-way street. That people who can address various issues related to diversity, and I'm just using shorthand here, they make staff positions that are not at the highest level. And so they check off the box that they've fulfilled this mandate, but haven't because those people aren't in positions of influence within the organization or agency. And that is an issue that I'm talking to the DCLA about, because they have a position open with disability expertise, but it is not at the higher administrative level, and therefore my concern is that that person won't come with the right expertise and won't have the voice within the agency that is needed.
Thank you. When we worked on the disability report, one of the recommendations for everybody, policymakers, dance makers, and funders, was that this work begins at home. In an organization, you have to live it from within. And this is an interesting question that goes along with that, and it sort of speaks to the tension that we have inside organizations, and that is, for our arts organizations, how can we influence our HR departments to invest in a diverse workforce?
Ooh, stop coming to work. Stop coming to work. Those people of color, stop coming to work.
Because that will get noticed?
Well, if you look, and like the data revealed to us, the majority of the people of color are in the lower rungs and not holding the leadership positions, but we all know who's doing the work there, right? So if we did not show up, what would happen? That's...
Yeah.
In terms of collaboration, one of the recommendations was collaborate more, collaborate better. What does that really look like?
So, I don't want to keep talking here, but so collaboration and partnership, we've also been talking about in WOCA all across the country for the past couple of years with arts organizations that are looking to build, to diversify, to become more inclusive, to foster more equitable practices in their organizations. And the key here is And Andrew, you said a little bit about the co-opting that often happens when one, mainly a larger organization, may want to partner with a smaller organization that is on the ground, that has been doing the work, that has the particular expertise in doing this work, without recognizing like all of the work that went ahead and all of the work that they've done for years to lay the foundation for what they have. I think it's mainly about building meaningful and authentic relationships that aren't based in transactions, but that are really about cultivating, well, what benefits or assets do you bring to the table, and how can we work together in order to further a particular goal or mission.
Andrea, where does leadership fall there?
Leadership in the,
Informing those meaningful relationships.
oh, right, informing the meaningful relationships. So I think the leadership comes from all sides, and it requires all of us then to think about who do we need to bring in during the planning process, right? So a meaningful partnership is not someone rushing out and doing a Google search for like Asian American a week before the event and saying, hey, can you get us some taiko drummers? Or something. Hey, I need someone to talk about dumplings 2 days from now. That is not meaningful collaboration. So I think the leadership comes with recognizing that, yeah, it's all happened. You know what I mean. You know what I mean. And I think the meaningful collaboration comes from having that dialogue way before, and maybe when we're even writing the grants, so we can apply together.
Okay, I'm out of time. Simi, do you have anything to add to that? Where does leadership come in?
No.
No. Okay. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank our panelists. You're great. And I appreciate the conversation. Thanks to Dance NYC for bringing us together.